This episode, we are jumping back to the early 80s, the heyday of horror, if you will. At least that's what we like to consider it as. We're taking a trip down a path that we seem to take every once in a while on this show. If you're a regular listener of this show, you know that me and Mark have been friends since the dawn of time.
Oh, yeah.
And there's a lot of our early friendship that revolved around horror movies. And this episode, we are delving into a horror movie that, for one reason or another, we had nothing to do with it when we were kids. But here we are, 85 years later, talking about Pieces from 1982.
Yeah, this is one of those exploitation horror films that, if you're you have to be a horror fan to know about this one. I think you can't. This isn't your casual horror fan who maybe saw I Know What You Did Last Summer and a Scream film or something. No, you got to really know your stuff to know about this one. This one to me is like, this is one of those deep cuts, I guess you would say, if you were to reference a way of describing this type of film. This is for a horror fan who's dabbled deeper into the genre than just your mainstream films that everybody knows about.
Yeah, I can't imagine, even if you were back in the day going to wander over to the horror section of the local video store, that the box art from this particular film would be like, oh, hey, yep, I'm going to check that one out. Just, not to say that it's bad, but the box art kind of gives it somewhat a way of what to expect a little bit. The same thing goes with, it's not like you're going to, as a casual fan, wander over into the horror section and be like, oh, Deadly Spawn, I got to check that one out.
Yeah. And this is another one of those films that you had to have grown up in the video store era to really appreciate, because, back before the internet, back before Netflix, back before Amazon Prime and all that good stuff, it was Friday. You get back from school, you got the weekend, and what did you usually do if you didn't have any real big plans? Well, you and your family usually would go to the video store. And you go to the video store and you'd spend maybe an hour there or less, just going through each film, grabbing the box, reading the synopsis on the back. And, it was really the cover art that really would hook you in and pull you into these films. And Pieces is one of those films that not all the video stores had. And we're going back, forget about Blockbuster and all that crap that came later. We're going back to the mom and pop days, where some places had it, some places didn't. But if you went to the horror section, there were your standards, like the Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street series. But then there were movies like Pieces where you had to dig a little deeper and, see if you wanted to check out. And I hadn't seen this movie until actually this month. This was the first time I saw it. But I remember the cover art, and I remember seeing it many times, and it was one of those I knew it was an exploitation film even as a kid, and it was like, wow, this is going to be pretty gory and intense, and I never saw it until now. So
I saw it once or twice before, years ago, but then when coming back, getting ready for this particular episode, it was one of those to where I didn't necessarily remember too much about it watching it this time. The couple of things with this movie that you have to be aware of if you've never seen Pieces going into it is that, like you had said, this is by all intents and purposes, this is an exploitation movie. The gore is over the top. And the other thing with this movie too is this is one of those movies that you can't go into with very high expectations at all. we'll get into this a little bit as we go through this episode, but at least in my mind, there really isn't really a coherent plot to this movie. It's kind of all over the place, and really this is just, if you were to think of it in today's terms, this really is a low-budget movie that somebody just wanted to make, and they wanted to show a lot of boobs, they wanted to show a lot of blood, and they wanted to show a lot of gore, and that's it.
Yeah, basically. This is, okay, so 1978, Halloween came out, and then 4 years before that, Texas Chainsaw Massacre came out, and then, Friday the 13th came out in 1980. So you've got the slasher thing going. And so at this point, filmmakers are like, okay, all we need is some hot naked girls and some blood and a killer, and we've got the formula. That's basically it. And it's kind of interesting too when you watch a film like Pieces, and I'm not gonna say anything bad about it because it is what it is. But if you compare this film to classics like Halloween or Texas Chainsaw Massacre, you see like, wow, there's a whole different level of filmmaking going on here. There's talent and skill and and storytelling and things that, and acting ability and those in Halloween and Chainsaw and some of the more well-known horror movies. But then you've got movies like Pieces where basically kind of a cash grab, but then they have their own certain quality to them that appeal to horror fans as well. And this film was, it's a very basic story. It's basically you got this kid. It starts out, this kid's putting together this puzzle of a naked woman. His mom comes in, shames him, makes fun of him and all of this, and gets angry at him. And so he ends up killing his mother, chops her up, and then the police come, and then they think that somebody else must have broken into the house or whatever, and the kid gets off free. And, you flash forward to the future, and there's this college campus, and then there's this new killer who's basically killing all people, knocking people out one by one with a chainsaw. And it's, like you said, it's very explicit, it's very gory, it's very in your face, very bloody film, but it kind of rolls along. And it's one of these films to me, like I actually was strangely entertained, and I was very surprised by that because I think I had seen some of the kills or whatever on like a website or whatever, a horror film website. And so watching the film or having to go through the whole narrative of it, it was like, okay, well, I'm going to have to get through a lot of boring stuff to get to like anything interesting. But at the same time, I was kind of hooked in it, to be honest with you.
It's interesting that you mentioned cash grab a little bit ago, because that is one of the things that with this movie that I really picked up on the most recent time that I watched it was it almost seemed like, even though it was an early 80s movie, but it kind of was doing in multiple aspects what we had talked about with other movies on this show before. So you had the whole overbearing parent at the very beginning of the movie, which seemed to come from things like Carrie and stuff like that. But then a lot of the other stuff of the movie was really like, kind of to go back what I was kind of initially saying, was they were like, oh, hey, so this piece over here works in a horror movie. Let's take that and put that over here. This piece works, and let's put that over here. This piece works over here. So let's just do all that. Because the one thing that really wasn't in this movie is there wasn't a lot of drug use. There wasn't really a lot of what we come to know with like the Friday the 13th movies is, you don't do drugs, you don't drink, you don't have sex, and then you're fine. But this one, there wasn't really a lot of like sex in the movie. There wasn't a lot of like drug stuff. If you were a female in this movie, I think every one of them got naked at some point.
I think so, and I think now looking back, it was only females who were killed.
Yeah.
It makes sense because like why he's doing it. That's right.
Yeah, there's a couple towards the end where they almost get killed, but there's not a lot of over-sexualization in the movie. And oddly enough, there's a couple of different shower scenes, which is kind of funny. But and the other thing, too, again, to kind of go back to that, just taking from other movies and stuff, The other thing that is in this movie that is kind of over the top, well, the dialogue is absolutely horrible to begin with, but there's a lot of like real weird one-liners in the movie. There was one at one point where I think it was the detective or something, when basically he was like saying they were like, you know, kind of going down a dead end or whatever, but he was like, oh, yep, we're buying clothes without tags and trying them on for size.
Yeah.
You know, and
Yeah,
you're like, what?
The dialogue was horrendous.
Oh,
And then there was that whole like scene, that really bizarre scene where okay, so there's this like female. All right, we should probably give a little concept of what's going on here. So I mentioned like, okay, so there's a serial killer killing off all these women at a college.
well, just to step back just a little tiny bit there, because I think this is important to understand the story. So you had the opening scene, which we'd already talked about. So the mom dies. Jump forward 40 years to the college. Because I think that plays a little bit into it because of
that. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so the killer basically, and I think it's been compared in some reviews I read, it's like he looks like the character in Dark Shadows. He's basically like a guy in a fedora and a black long trench coat, and he comes out with a chainsaw and kills people. And that part was a little bit off in my opinion in terms of storyline, where, you know, here he is trying to kill, you know, people off in a college, and, you know, do you really bring a chainsaw to do that? You know, it just seemed like kind of overkill. Like the idea of like you can try to get, you know, if you're trying to get away with this, why would you bring like something that's that loud? But anyhow, you've got this killer on the loose, and then killing all these girls, and the cops get involved, and it's, you know, really bad writing in terms of how the detectives are trying to work with the, you know, the officials at the school, the dean and the professors and all that. But anyhow, they get this female cop to come, and here's the whole part I was trying to get at when we were talking about strange one-liners. So they get this female cop to come aboard, and I guess she's like a tennis superstar as well, and so she's like playing tennis at the campus, and then she goes, and this is where I'm confused. I think she might be like undercover, but anyhow, she's out one night, and she gets like attacked or like by this Asian guy who's like kind of like trying to like use martial arts on her, and then like the main character, like he comes to her rescue, and then it turns out that this guy was like I think a professor, and he's like, oh, sorry, I must have had bad chop suey, and he walks off. Like, what?
Yeah, the whole thing is filled with weird stuff like that. There's a thing at the there's stuff at the beginning where you're just like, wait, what? That doesn't make any sense. What?
Real terrible writing, real terrible acting. But you know what? This movie, in terms of quality, it reminded me, this would be the perfect film to go back to back with Basket Case. I mean, this is like, you got to have like a whole giant bag of popcorn, a cooler full of beer, and just sit back and enjoy. I mean, that would be the perfect double feature, in my opinion, like Basket Case and Pieces.
It's not a good movie at all. It's really not. The acting is atrocious. The storyline, we'll get to this a little bit in just a minute here. The storyline is completely off the wall. The one thing I will say, the biggest praise I will give this movie is, and I don't know if you can get like the original version of this movie anymore. I think anything you'd find in this movie now, unless you had it like on VHS from like 1983, it's probably like the uncut, like unrated version of the movie. So I would assume that the version that I saw, the version that you saw, might be a little tiny bit gorier than it originally was. But, you know, for the most part, the kills in this movie are insane. I mean, just like, you know, you have the opening scene where the boy is hacking his mom up with an axe, and I mean, like, and you can hear it too, you know, it's like into her forehead, and you're like, oh, and like she's blood gushing out, and then you have the next scene where, the lady gets her head cut off, or sorry, the student gets her head cut off with a chainsaw, and the guy, like, there's no hesitation, all he goes, whoop, and the head just pops off and flies across the lawn. And there's a scene, a little bit later in the pool area where the young lady is chopped to pieces with the chainsaw, and you're just like, damn, this is 1982? Wow.
Yeah, this was like that really extremely gory period of time when like the slasher films were in full throttle. And there was, it was like, it reminds me of like The Mutilator was pretty gory, just like that. I mean, The Mutilator, that's another movie that Pieces is very similar to in terms of plot lines and gore and all of that. And this is like, very, what's it called? What's the word for conventional gore before the CGI stuff?
Oh, practical effects?
Practical effects, yeah. This is all like, fake blood and, fake body parts and all of that. And yeah, this is what that like extreme, that era when they were really pushing the boundaries. And it does, like, as a kid, when you were a kid and you saw something like this, it really would probably affect you in a deep psychological way. But now looking back, it's like, you see obviously like, oh, that's a dummy, oh, that's fake blood, or, all that. You can kind of put it together, but pretty intense. I mean, this is one of those extreme films, again, exploitation, and accordingly, now it has a cult following, but it also was a drive-in favorite, which makes sense. So this is one of those films you went out to go see a lot of gore and a lot of blood. It's kind of funny how they had like this storyline weaved into the whole thing, and you find out, spoiler alert, that it was the dean who was the killer, and
which makes no sense at all.
Yeah, but it was, again, this is, if you're looking for this is a massive beer and popcorn film. This is like, I'm going to say PBR and whatever the generic Walmart brand popcorn is. Get a giant bag of that. Get a 12 case of PBR. Get your best friends with you. Sit back and on a weekend and watch this. And if you're a horror fan, you really can't go wrong with this one. And even though it's a pretty terrible film in terms of the writing is bad, the dialogue's bad, the acting is bad, it still somehow manages to work. Similar to, again, like to Basket Case. Like, it reminds me of that one in a lot of ways, where that movie is just terrible on all fronts, but then somehow you look back and you're like, yeah, that was kind of fun to watch, even though it was terrible.
Yeah, this isn't a movie that you ask your wife and kids to watch with you.
No.
This is definitely a movie that you ask, some buddies over to watch. But it is, the storyline is absolutely atrocious. They don't explain anything. So to give a prime example of that, so you have these other horror movies out there that something damaging happens to the kid's psyche when they're young, whether it's whatever, My Bloody Valentine or Silent Night, Deadly Night, or Friday the 13th, or any of those movies. You kind of have that explanation of, okay, so this happened when the kid was 8, 9, 10 years old, and then jump forward, in this case, which was kind of a big leap, 40 years, and then he's doing whatever he is doing to get revenge on certain folks. So this particular movie, it does that. You have this like 10-year-old kid who's whatever playing with this nudie puzzle, and then his mom yells at him and he snaps, and then jump forward, and he gets off. That's the thing, he gets off. Then you jump forward 40 years, and then all of a sudden there's this college campus, and then these killings start to happen, and you're led to believe it's the groundskeeper, who's probably not even 40 years old when this thing was being made. And so right away you're like, that's not the guy. The last 10 minutes of the movie, they're like, nope, it's the dean. And there's no explanation of why this guy was doing anything other than he was trying to make some, I think they said he trying to piece together some model or something, essentially make the puzzle that he was making when he was a kid. And so again, they make you to believe that he's making this model thing in his like freezer cooler thing in his house, and then they try to throw these weird twists in addition to that of it. Oh nope, it's the Dean. And then all of a sudden you come to find out, oh wait, yeah, he was piecing them all together. He's got this weird Frankenstein thing hanging on a hook in his closet. And then they find that, and then again, to go back to what I was saying before, where they were taking all these pieces of all these different horror movies that seem to work. So then they put a final jump scare in the movie, which makes absolutely no sense. You're like, oh,
yeah. Oh my gosh, I forgot about that.
You're like, wait, what? So the Frankenstein girl that's in the closet is alive?
I totally forgot about that. That is so funny.
Now that I spent the last 5 minutes ripping on the movie, I'm going to say exactly what Mark said. You have to ignore all of that, and you have to go and, get some buddies or do it by yourself, whatever. Just get some, and you're not going to want to do this with your wife. You're not going to do it with your kids. Unless you're a chick that's into horror, then you might not want to do it with your boyfriend. I don't know. Whatever you're into is fine with us. But it is a good, gory, blood and boobs filled, just hour and a half. I mean, if that's what you want to watch, then this is the movie for you.
I have to give it a thumbs up for sure, because it is for what it is. I mean, again, it's not a great film. It's not a well done film, but for what, in terms of a beer and popcorn film, this is right up there with Basket Case and, some of the other films we've reviewed in the past that, I would definitely highly recommend that if that's what you're looking for. A couple of things too I want to bring up too that I thought was kind of funny that I didn't realize, but just till recently, and I knew I kind of, while watching it, I thought this too, but the groundskeeper in this film, you may recognize him. He was Bluto in the Robin Williams Popeye film.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh.
When I first saw him, I was like, yeah, that looks like Bluto. And then, I hadn't seen that movie in, years and years and years, so I don't know how I, remembered that. But then just now I looked it up, and it's like, yep, that's him. And then another thing, I'm a MST3K fan, and the main character, Ian Sarah, who was playing Kendall James, the main character of the film, the teenage guy or whatever, college student guy, he is in a film called Pod People, which is a terrible, horrible B film. I was like, throughout the whole film, I was like, I know who he is. What was he in? And then I looked up his IMDb, and yep, that's him. He was in Pod People.
Yeah, I give it a thumbs up too, even though it's kind of funny. We have these, occasionally we'll have these episodes where we will spend 75 to 80% of the episode ragging on a movie, but then we're both like, yeah, we really liked it.
Yeah. Well, strangely enough, Basket Case came out the same year that this film did.
Right? Yep. Yeah, wow. I think 82, if you did some digging through 82, I think there's a lot of these movies that came out because, you had the success of Halloween, of course, and then Halloween 2, and,
Friday the 13th, Part 3.
Yeah. So, I mean,
came out this year.
Yeah, this was getting to be that area where you had April Fool's Day and all these other, Graduation Day and Mother's Day, and, to where Hollywood was kind of like, hey, so these horror movies, we can make these for whatever, $50,000 and turn around and make a couple of $1 million on them. Let's do it. Yeah.
Pieces is a very good example of what the slasher era was becoming in the early 80s and after Halloween, after Friday the 13th, and it was becoming this is what we're going to do. We're going to make movies like this, and this is going to be the new template, and this is what you get.